Welcome to the NeuroHeir podcast, the show for cycle breakers, parents, young adults, and helping professionals ready to understand their nervous system through a generational lens, heal what isn't theirs to carry, and consciously choose what comes next. Hi, I'm your host, Leanna Hunt, an associate clinical mental health counselor and certified performance coach. Each week, you'll get stories, science, and somatic practices, plus my signature 4N framework: notice, name, nurture, and navigate, to help you honor resilience, break silence, and build deeper connection with yourself and those you love, all while shaping a legacy of safety, freedom, and possibility. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NeuroHeir podcast. If my voice sounds a little bit different today, or if you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice a different background. I'm currently sitting in my hotel room in Cozumel, Mexico at the time of this recording. I have to look at everything and realize that things are how they are supposed to be. Timing is as is needed for us and our growth, and oftentimes we don't see it. This last week, I kind of have to laugh, was just this perpetual kind of snowball of actually trying to get here. And as I was trying to record this before I left on my trip, I couldn't finish recording it. And so I had to pause. I had to run to work. We realized there was all these problems with my current passport. So for anybody listening, just so you know, if you have a current passport and you go to renew it, which mine doesn't expire until June, but we were trying to be proactive, it cancels your current passport. We did not know this. Pretty sure this is news. Even to people at the airlines, it was news. And to try to get an emergency passport appointment is very difficult and most likely will not even be in your own state. So the stars basically aligned. We had this, my husband and I kind of laughed, this amazing race type experience that lasted almost 24 hours from the time we left Salt Lake City on Wednesday morning, which was 2 days ago. Landed in Dallas, where our layover was, where there happened to be a passport office that does emergency passport appointments. And they happened to have one last opening by the time we landed. We landed in Dallas. We took an Uber, literally we're running through the airport, took an Uber to the government building. We're there for several hours, which they can't even promise or guarantee that you're going to get the same day passport. Waited, missed our flight, got the passport, went back to the airport, found a flight to a different part of Mexico, got there, took an hour-long shuttle ride to the place where the ferry was. And if we didn't make the ferry, we were going to sleep there in Playa del Carmen. We landed in, if you wanted to know, we landed in Cancun, took this shuttle, an hour ride, was supposed to be an hour, to Playa del Carmen. The shuttle guy drove way faster than he was supposed to, but we ended up getting to Playa del Carmen at 9:54 p.m. local time. And the last ferry that leaves from Playa del Carmen to Cozumel was leaving in 6 minutes. So we get out of the shuttle and we run on cobblestone roads, pulling our suitcase and our luggage. And we get on the ferry at 9:59 p.m. and make it to our destination just before midnight. So I kind of have to laugh about that. Also, it was a really powerful time for my husband and I to reflect on our own nervous system work and realizing if we hadn't done our own work, there's no way that we would have survived something at the capacity that we did, something like that experience. So here I am. I did not get to finish recording the episode before I left, but it feels really timely because as I sit here and look out at the beautiful ocean, I just feel so blessed to get to be here today. And this is also the first episode that I am just recording without a script. That's actually been requested. So for those of you guys requested a non-scripted episode, here it is. But what's also so fascinating about timing is today is the 1-year anniversary of my dad's passing. And so I just finished a workout at the gym, was looking out at the palm trees. It's a full glass enclosed gym that looks out on this beautiful garden and courtyard. And I just started to cry as I was reflecting on this last year and this journey that's gotten me to this point. So for those of you that don't know, or maybe new listeners, my dad passed away from melanoma cancer. He was just in his mid-60s, and besides that was really, really healthy. he passed away during surgery, where the doctors had been, I think this was his third surgery in 1 week. They were trying to relieve pain from the cancer that had spread all over his body. And what's even more interesting is that as he passed away in January 23rd of 2025, just a few months previous, I think it was maybe September or October, he had had clear scans after his immunotherapy, after the removal of his melanoma that was on his back. And so just thinking about timing and all those things, and things like just as they are, and reflecting on this year, I couldn't help but just feel so much gratitude for this past year. A few weeks after he passed away was when I started writing Becoming a NeuroHeir book. And this past weekend, I sat alone in a hotel room, thanks to my husband, who set that up for me to just be able to focus, and worked through the first round of developmental edits from the editor. And it took me about 17 hours cumulative of actual editing time. And so this whole last week, since editing the book to being here, I have had this beautiful week of reflection leading up to today. And so just honoring timing and my relationship with time, which might sound strange. And if you are interested in exploring what I actually mean in your own relationship with time, I invite you to read one of the first personal development books I ever read, called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. He actually has this whole paragraph on time and learning how to create a healthy relationship with time. And probably one of my favorite quotes ever comes from his book, which is, "I am where time comes from." And learning to honor time as something bigger than ourselves, and respecting time. And that as we create this relationship with time, we start to see time instead of this hindrance. It's kind of this beautiful flow and dance. And I'm getting to just sit in this moment and honoring time and where I am on my journey, and everything that led up to me being here and getting to record this episode for myself and for all of you that are listening in this beautiful place on this 1-year anniversary, after this week of edits and reflection, and even this intense 24-hour journey with David to get here, and so much to reflect on and feel so grateful for, and thanking all of you for being here. That kind of brings me into, as I was reflecting in this beautiful place in the gym this morning, I got a message from somebody I don't even know, a man, which I think is vulnerable in itself, right? Most of the time, my connections and conversations come from women that are listening to the podcast, and not men, besides my husband. And he said something that just really touched me. So, and again, lining up on this day as I was just sitting in gratitude and emotional on the treadmill and looking out at the palm trees. And he messaged me saying, I've just found your work and your podcast, and I had to pull over because I just needed to cry. And that is just so beautiful. And this man allowed himself to have this vulnerable moment with himself and then share it with me. And that really is the heart of this work, and the first N of notice. That first N is notice for a very, very significant reason, because noticing and that awareness is truly the doorway in to shifting and healing the nervous system. And through our own vulnerability, even with ourselves, and then starting to experience that with others, that helps deepen that notice. And vulnerability really is the pathway back to connection. It's the pathway back to even living more in our window of tolerance. And this episode was supposed to be this deep dive into the window of tolerance. That's also been requested, but that's going to be more the focus of starting next week instead of this week. But really thinking about, do I allow myself to be vulnerable, even with myself? That man's comment I thought about for the last few hours, and just wondering, how often do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with ourselves? And as we start to expand our own window of tolerance and our own healing, and as we've talked through the last several episodes, then does that vulnerability allow us to then start to be vulnerable? That vulnerability with ourselves, does that then start to allow us to be vulnerable with other people? And is that the pathway back to healing? So just some questions to ponder on and think about today, and thinking about your own journey wherever you are. And today, just this invitation for you to just notice in yourself where you are. And maybe this permission, if you have not been able to take that yet, what would it look like for you to just sit with yourself today? That without judgment, you could allow yourself to just be with your own nervous system. I know how scary that is sometimes, because for years, I thought avoidance was the way into just getting through my life, right? Like just surviving. But surviving is not the same as thriving. Surviving is not the same as creating deep connection with ourselves and with others. If we're just surviving, we are just on the edge of the nervous system's job of protection, right? Like that survival, if you feel like you're currently just in survival still, first honoring that you are where you are. And this isn't a moment that you have to judge yourself. It's more to start to be aware of yourself and where you are. And realizing, again, that brain's number one job is protection. It is to keep you safe. But think about too, when I say safety, we think about that fight or flight, freeze type of safety, where your nervous system in those moments of safety and threat, it's really thinking that, okay, I'm running from this saber-toothed tiger. I'm running from this bear. I'm fighting it back, or I'm completely shutting down and maybe playing dead or trying to freeze and bypass that. And how often that survival energy we think is living is not the same as surviving. And on the other side, so it's like survival, maybe being more present, and then on the other side of that is thriving. And so often our nervous systems, we don't even realize that our nervous systems are in survival, and we have no idea what else is possible beyond that because we've never lived that, or we've spent so little time living that. And remember, as we expand our window of tolerance, which means this window of connection, this window of thriving, this window of growth, we can have healthy ways to not shut down, but to repair. It's kind of like, I see that in this window, and the window isn't this, like if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see my hand kind of just moving across this horizontal plane, like straight. It is not just this linear field is the window of tolerance. It's more kind of like this wave. And sometimes we're going to have these peaks of hyper arousal, which go beyond our window, which again, we're going to dive in deeper next week, or go below our window, which is kind of more that shutdown. But even in our window, we can have, like the guy who messaged me this morning, it was a healthy cry for him where he started to feel connected to himself. And couldn't that still be in the window, that crying? Couldn't he still experience this moment of vulnerability? And it did not have to cause his system to shut down. Does that make sense? So just want to invite you all to think about, and maybe getting really honest this next week of, am I living in this constant state of survival? And by me acknowledging that and saying that out loud, does that have to create a meaning for me? Or could it just be this noticing and awareness? I'm rereading my favorite series called The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. She's actually a local to Utah, a local author. I highly recommend the series. It's a period series and I love it. Probably even love it more than some Jane Austen stuff, to be honest. But as I was rereading, the main character is connecting with somebody new that moved into town. And back then, right, everybody knew everything about who was coming into town and if there was somebody new. And he's kind of this mysterious man. And she runs into him in the tea shop and they end up having tea together, which also She doesn't have a chaperone. She probably shouldn't be having tea with this man, but she wanted to get to know him, and he invited her to have tea, and they shared tea. And she starts to ask what he does for a career, right? Just very curious, a little hesitant, like, who is this new person in our town? And he basically says that he is a war photographer. And as he says that, she drops her fork, and he picks up on that. And he kind of says something like, you know, who did you lose in the war? And she doesn't know how to respond to this because this isn't something she talked about. And she actually lost the person that she loved the most to war. And through the novel, through the first book and second book, she's just starting to kind of talk about to herself, like open up in the book about losing this man who was so dear to her, who she loved. And then he asks, and I'm just going to read it to you. He's still trying to connect to her, and he wants to know more about who she lost, and she's really resistant at first. And then he asks, was he a brother? And then she just said, a friend. And then she said something so powerful. She says, this is not something that I speak of. And then he replies with, I don't speak of most things, but I have found that war should be spoken of. I even say it must be. And she says, why? When it is so painful and so cruel. And then he says something so profound. He says, we speak of it so we may end it. And I want you guys to think about that, as I've shared war research from Poland. If you guys remember from the last few episodes, I was reading somebody's article of, she compiles intensive research looking at war and intergenerational trauma. And they talk about some of that Poland research and what they found through families that started telling stories about what their ancestors have been through and what those stories meant for the descendants multiple generations later, and what they were able to learn about themselves through hearing these stories. And something really interesting is they talk about silence too. And I've talked a lot about silence on the podcast. You can go back to early, was it episode 5 and 6, I think, talking about silence. If you haven't listened to those, I highly recommend going back. And that maybe for silence, it was critical for survival way back then during World War II, right? But something that they also say in the research, which is really, really interesting, it says, yet 30 years after the fall of communism, the benefits of this silence may have faded. How interesting that now we're looking, finally, even research is supporting that silence kept families safe for a long time. And I invite you to start thinking, if you haven't already, about your family stories, about what your family has endured for at least the last 100 years. And obviously longer than that, and that silence was a protection mechanism that kept people safe for a long time. But now more than ever, we have these younger generations, which it even talks about in this article, that are starting to see that talking about things, the hard things, and family stories and what their families have been through, is actually helping and contributing toward this sense of embodiment in themselves. How powerful is that to think about? I'm just kind of reading over this article. And one person said towards the end that they want these stories to be told and their family sacrifices to be remembered. What would it be like to have an environment that you could explore this in your own family? And I understand, and I know more than ever, because I hear this all the time from my clients that are doing their own healing work, and they're trying to make sense of silence and things they're realizing in their own nervous system, especially for those that still currently deal with intense anxiety. They're starting to see how the family system has been run. Again, not from a place of judgment, but from curiosity, and starting to notice and starting to see themes of secrecy and silence and things that were never talked about. And now how they've seen that that's happened, and also this intense anxiety. And remember that anxiety is just messages from your nervous system that when we don't talk about things, when we don't share things, the nervous system has to make sense of it anyway. And so, for an example, if you go to a parent as a child, you sense something is off with your mom, and you go to her as a child and say, Mom, are you okay? Because you already know something's off. Remember, that nervous system is scanning for that safety and threat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so as children that are so intuitive starts going, tries to go to their parent, and then that parent comes back and says, I'm fine. When the child knows that the energy in the room and the energy of the nervous system of the parent is not fine, and that child trusts this parent so much, then that child goes back to themselves, and it usually makes that mean something in my sensing skills and my system is off. So that must mean that something is wrong with me. And that something wrong with me then creates kind of like turns the dial on that nervous system to start to look for threat more frequently and more common, and creates that state of hyperarousal right outside of the window of I have to be more vigilant because my sensing skills are off. So one of the biggest things we see is that in our own system, going back to the beginning, that when we can allow ourselves to start to notice, and that when we can be vulnerable with ourselves, that actually can be the doorway in to change everything. And remember guys, that your family, those closest to you, they might not be ready for this. But the invitation I'm leaving with you today is just to deepen that vulnerability in yourself, to deepen that notice practice. And again, over the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to dive deeper into the window of tolerance so you guys can really understand how it works and tie that into each of the 4 ends, because why I created them, they're not just random. They go in this order: notice, name, nurture, and navigate. So as we end this episode right now, all I want you to do is just practice noticing a little deeper with yourself, inviting you to be like that gentleman who reached out to me, who said he just had to pull over and just allow himself to cry. He didn't make it mean anything, like good or bad, right or wrong. He was able to just sit with himself and notice there is emotion here and it just needs to leave my body. Lastly, I started this deep, intensive somatic certification, and the facilitator that's leading it trained under kind of the OGs of this nervous system work through the somatic experiencing really intense certification. And when we think about that, like the last several weeks have all just been on noticing, and I love that. And so I'll leave you with this gentle noticing practice. I want you guys to just sit where you are and just take a few gentle belly breaths, slowly in through the nose and out through the mouth. And maybe just notice where your body is connecting to the earth, whether it's where you're sitting or laying or standing. And maybe just settle in a little bit, just a little bit deeper. And just notice your body. And for today, I want you to just allow yourself to feel, maybe just within the last day to week, just allow yourself to feel an experience that made you smile or just felt really good in your body. Just allow yourself to wander back to that time. And just notice where in your body you feel you can recall that experience. It's usually not in your head. It's going to be somewhere like maybe your heart or your stomach, your hands, maybe your shoulders. And just allow yourself to notice what that feels like in your body. And maybe this can be enough to just feel something that for you feels supported, feels positive, feels exciting, feels joyful, feels good. And then until next time, just want to invite you to do this anytime you need to. You can come back to this moment. You can allow yourself to just feel something that feels supportive for you. And I'm going to leave you guys with that. I hope you guys all have a beautiful day. Just know we're going to deepen this work in the NeuroHeir membership that's going to be coming late February. I'll be sharing more information soon. As always, may you be able to notice what your body has been trying to tell you all along, because that is the start of this work. That awareness, that noticing, that getting vulnerable with yourself, that is the true start of nervous system healing. So until next time, bye guys.